The morning sun was shyly peeking through the thin curtains of my bedroom when I woke up. My 68 years made themselves felt with aching joints. It was my morning routine to wake up in pain, not my alarm clock. I'm used to it, though. Used to being alone, to the silence of the big house, to the absence of anyone asking, "How did you sleep, Irma?" I slowly got out of bed and walked to the window. My house was on a quiet street in Buchanan, a small town where everyone knows each other but few people are really interested in other people's lives. Pulling back the curtain, I looked out over my manicured garden. The roses had already begun to bloom, brightly colored. At least they never disappointed me, unlike my son, Noel. Even mentally saying his name, I felt a strange mixture of love and bitterness. My only child, soon to be 44 years old. The man I'd lived for, worked to exhaustion, and saved every extra dollar for. The man who now barely finds time to call me once a month. I walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on. My movements were precise and deliberate, the result of years of habitual order. 35 years as chief accountant at Buchanan Industries had taught me the value of precision, order, and the proper allocation of resources. Those skills came in handy when, after retirement 12 years ago, I decided to get into investing. At the time, many people thought I was crazy. "Irma, at your age, it's time to take a vacation, not risk money," my friend Rose said. But I didn't listen. All my life I had worked with numbers, understood their language and patterns. And I was right. What started out as modest savings, about $300,000 in retirement savings and insurance money from my husband's death, had turned into a fortune. $13 million, a figure I still couldn't say out loud without getting a little dizzy. I hadn't told anyone about my wealth. Even Rose only knew that I was pretty well off. In our little town, people would be gossiping nonstop if they knew that lowly widow Irma Abbott was a multimillionaire. And Noel would probably treat me differently if he knew. As I sipped my morning tea, I glanced at the calendar hanging on the refrigerator. My son's birthday was only 5 days away, 44 years. How quickly time flies. It seemed like only yesterday that I'd been holding his tiny body in my arms in the delivery room, and Alan, my late husband, was standing next to me with that proud yet bewildered look on his face. Alan died when Noel was just 10 years old. A heart attack, sudden and merciless. In an instant, I was alone with a young son and a mountain of unpaid bills. Alan and I had just taken out a mortgage on this house, hoping to raise at least 3 children here. But fate had it differently. I remember those years as a series of endless workdays, sleep deprivation, and a constant fear of failure. I took any part-time job I could get to make Noel's life worth living. I wanted him not to need anything, not to feel inferior to other children because of the absence of a father and modest income. Perhaps that's when I made my biggest mistake. I was so afraid that my son would feel deprived that I started giving him too much. The latest toys, fancy clothes, summer camps where kids from rich families went. I was saving for his education, cutting my own expenses to a minimum. I didn't go to the hairdresser, I bought clothes at discount centers, and for years I drove the old Ford I'd inherited from Alan. And Noel got used to it, used to getting whatever he wanted. First, it was innocent childish whims, then teenage arrogance, then cynical adult selfishness. I sighed and put the empty cup in the sink. What was the use of reminiscing now? You can't change the past. What matters is the future. And that's what I'd been thinking about these past few months. I pulled a thick envelope from my desk drawer. Inside was a check for $13 million made out to Noel Abbott. My entire fortune. Everything I'd earned, accumulated, and multiplied. I pondered this decision for a long time and finally came to the conclusion it was time to let go. It was time to give it all to Noel while I was still alive to see how he would use it. All I had to do was decide exactly how to give him the gift. And yesterday, it hit me. I went upstairs to my office and opened the safe hidden behind a painting of a mountain lake. From the safe, I pulled out a small book in a worn leather binding. Thomas the Brave Knight was a children's fairy tale that Noel had adored as a child. We read it with him every night for several years. He knew the story by heart, but he still asked, "Mommy, read about the knight." It was a first edition book, dated 1958. It took me almost 2 months to find it through a specialized auction. I paid far more than the average retired woman could afford, but I knew I could. and I wanted this edition to be a special gift for my son. A reminder of the happy moments of his childhood, of what had been between us before he grew up and became distant. I opened the book carefully. The time-yellowed pages held the spirit of the past. Carefully placing the check between the pages, I closed the book and ran my hand over the leather binding. At that moment, the phone rang. "Irma, are you home?" Rose Pemberton's familiar voice came through the receiver. "Yes, of course I am. Come in, I've just made some tea," I said as I went down the stairs. 10 minutes later, we were sitting in my small conservatory, sipping tea and looking out at the hydrangeas growing outside the window. Rose was my best and perhaps only real friend in Buchanan. We'd met 30 years ago when she'd taught at the local school where Noel attended. A lot had changed since then. Rose had retired and devoted herself fully to gardening, even winning local competitions. But one thing has remained constant: our friendship. "So, have you really made up your mind?" Rose asked, setting her cup aside. "To give all the money to Noel?" I nodded. Yes, I'd made up my mind. The book's done, the check's enclosed. I'll give it to him at his birthday party. Rose frowned and a deep wrinkle appeared between her eyebrows, a sure sign that she didn't approve of my decision. "Irma, darling, I don't mean to be rude, but are you sure Noel would appreciate it? I mean, not the money, but the book?" I smiled weakly. Of course I understood her doubts. Rose was one of the few people who had seen how my son had changed over the years. "Honestly, I'm not sure, but I want to believe that somewhere deep down inside he's still the boy who adored that fairy tale." Rose sighed. "I'm just worried about you. 13 million that's an astronomical amount of money. What if he just squanders it, or worse, his wife gets her hands on it?" At the mention of Vanity, my sister-in-law, I wrinkled my nose. Our relationship could be described as polite cold on the best of days and downright strained on the worst. Vanity Abbott, born Vanity Prescott, was 6 years younger than Noel and had an uncanny ability to spend money as quickly as if it were about to go out of circulation. A fitness instructor with socialite ambitions, she turned my son into an even bigger snob than he was before they met. "What about Winslow?" Rose continued. "Will your granddaughter even get anything?" I smiled, thinking of my 19-year-old granddaughter, the only person in my son's family with whom I still had a warm relationship. Winslow was the exact opposite of her parents: humble, thoughtful, passionate about literature. Sometimes I wondered how such a flower could grow in such infertile soil. "I have set aside a separate amount for her education. The money will go directly to the college where she is studying," I replied. "Besides, I am sure Noel will take care of her daughter." Rose looked unconvinced. "And when do you plan to move into that nursing home?" she asked, changing the subject. "Quiet Gardens isn't just a nursing home, Rose. It's a senior independent living community," I corrected her. "And I applied for next month. I think I'll start packing after Noel's birthday." "I still don't like the idea," Rose frowned. "You're giving your ungrateful son your entire fortune, and you're going off to this, what's his name, community. Why not just enjoy the money yourself? Travel, see the world?" I stood up and walked to the window. My gaze slid over the garden, over the house that had been my refuge for so many years. Because money was never the goal for me, Rose. Only a means. A means of securing a future for Noel. And now that I have so much of it, honestly, it's weighing me down. I just want to be free of them. Rose came over and put her hand on my shoulder. "I understand, darling. I just hope you don't regret your decision." I put my hand over hers. "I won't," I said with a confidence I didn't really feel. After all, what else is money for if not to help the ones you love? After Rose left, I spent the rest of the day wrapping the book in expensive paper and tying the perfect bow. Each movement was slow and deliberate, as if I were performing a sacred ritual. In a way, it was. I was saying goodbye to the past, to the fortune I had accumulated, to the hopes I had for my son. That evening, before I went to bed, I took another look at the wrapped gift lying on the bedside table. The beautiful wrapping hid a time-worn book, and the book hid a check that could change Noel's life forever. I lay in bed feeling strangely calm. No matter what happened at Noel's birthday party, I was ready to accept the consequences of my decision. After all, I'd spent my life worrying about my son's future. Now, it was time to take care of my own. Noel's birthday was unusually hot for Buchanan. The thermometer on my porch read 32 degrees, and it was only 4 in the afternoon. I stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, adjusting the collar of the new dress I'd bought especially for this occasion, a dark blue dress with a small floral print. Conservative, but elegant. At least that's what the saleswoman had said. The wrapped book lay on the table by the door, patiently waiting for its time. I took one last look at myself in the mirror, fixed my gray hair in a neat bundle, and took a deep breath. I'd had a strange feeling since this morning, a mixture of hope and anxiety. My life was going to change today. I knew it. But would it be for the better? I carefully took the gift and walked out of the house. My old Chevy was parked in the driveway, a faithful companion for the past 15 years. Another thing I was going to have to part with after moving to Quiet Gardens. Noel and Vanity's house was in the most prestigious part of Buchanan, the so-called North Hills. Huge mansions with immaculate lawns and 3 garages where property values started at $1 million. Noel bought his house 5 years ago when his business, a chain of premium car washes, began to make a serious profit. I was ashamed to admit even to myself, but I always felt uncomfortable coming to visit, like I wasn't good enough for the place. As I pulled up to my son's house, I saw a string of expensive cars lined up along the driveway. Mercedes, BMWs, Lexuses, a car show of wealthy Buchanan residents. My humble Chevy looked like a poor relative at a royal ball. I parked a little farther away so as not to disturb the other guests and walked slowly toward the house, clutching the gift tightly to my chest. The sounds of music and laughter came from the open windows, growing louder with each step I took. I was met on the doorstep by Vanity, a slender blonde with flawless makeup and a smile that never reached her eyes. Today, she was wearing a tight red dress that must have cost more than I spent on clothes in an entire year. "Irma!" she exclaimed with feigned enthusiasm. "How nice of you to be able to come, as if I could miss my own son's birthday." "Hello, Vanity," I replied, trying to smile. "You look lovely." "Oh, it's an old dress." She waved her hand, though we both knew it was new and expensive. "Come on in. Everyone's here. Noel will be happy to see you." I doubted the last statement, but I obediently followed her into the spacious living room filled with people. Most of them I was seeing for the first time. Noel's business associates, Vanity's friends from the health club, neighbors from the North Hills. There were few familiar faces. I only noticed Winslow, my granddaughter, chatting with some young man in the corner of the room. When she saw me, Winslow apologized to her conversation partner and hurried over to meet me. Her sincere smile was like a breath of fresh air amidst the strained social grimaces of those around her. "Grandma!" She hugged me, careful not to wrinkle her light summer dress. "I'm so glad you came. How could I not come to your father's birthday party?" I smiled, looking at her lovingly. "You look beautiful, dear. How are things going at college?" "It's going great." Winslow's eyes lit up. "I just got a perfect score on my English literature essay. Professor Higgins said I have the potential to be a—" "Winslow!" came Vanity's voice. "Help me with the canapes, please." My granddaughter sighed. "I'm sorry, grandmother. Duty calls. We'll talk later, okay?" She hurried off at her mother's call, and I was left alone in the middle of the room, feeling out of place and awkward. I looked around for Noel, but he was nowhere to be seen. Deciding that he was probably meeting other guests, I quietly made my way to the drinks table and grabbed a glass of white wine. The party had been organized with typical Vanity fanfare. Waiters in white gloves were serving trays of gourmet hors d'oeuvres. The bar was stocked with bottles of expensive alcohol, and a 3-tiered cake with gold edible decoration stood in the center of the living room. In the backyard, visible through the panoramic windows, was a huge grill where a chef in a high hat was grilling steaks. I walked over to one of the large windows, watching the commotion in the courtyard, and then I saw Noel. He was standing among a group of men, laughing loudly and waving a glass of whiskey. My son looked just like his father, at the same age-tall, broad-shouldered, with a distinctive dimple in his chin. Only his eyes were mine, gray with a slight tinge of green at the edges of the iris. He wore an expensive suit, obviously tailored, and new cufflinks that gleamed in the sun. His hair, already touched with gray at the temples, was styled with perfect carelessness. Noel was always careful about his appearance, another trait he'd inherited from his father. I didn't dare go out into the courtyard and interrupt his conversation. Instead, I stepped away from the window and sat on the edge of the couch, still holding the gift in my lap. Marilyn Porter, the wife of the city judge and one of the few women my age at the party, immediately sank down beside me. "Irma, dear, how are you?" she asked with genuine warmth in her voice. "It's been so long since we've seen each other." "I'm fine, Marilyn," I replied, delighted to see a familiar face. "How are your grandchildren?" We fell into a pleasant conversation about children and grandchildren, gardening, and the new cafe that had opened in downtown Buchanan. For a short time, I almost forgot my nervousness and anxious anticipation. But my relative calm was shattered when Vanity clapped her hands loudly, attracting the attention of the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with a radiant smile, "it's time for the special part of our evening, the gift giving." The guests applauded, and I felt my heart quicken. The moment of truth was approaching. Noel took center stage in the living room, sitting in a large leather chair like a king on a throne. Vanity stood beside him, directing the waiters where to place the gifts, right at her husband's feet, like offerings. One by one, the guests approached Noel, presenting their gifts and receiving a practiced smile and handshake in return. The gifts were appropriate to the setting. Expensive, exclusive, designed to impress. A golf set from a business partner, a case of collectible whiskey from a neighbor, a cashmere sweater from Aunt Vanity. I watched this ceremony with growing unease. My modestly wrapped gifts seemed increasingly out of place among the shiny boxes and bags of famous brands. "And now," Vanity announced as the line of guests drew to a close, "it's time for my gift." She made a sign to the waiter, who immediately came with a small velvet box on a silver tray. Vanity took the box and handed it to Noel with a solemn look. "Happy birthday, darling," she said, kissing him on the cheek. Noel opened the box and whistled in surprise. Inside was a wristwatch. I could see the glitter of gold and diamonds even from where I was sitting. "Patek Philippe," he exclaimed, pulling out the watch and showing it to his guests. "Just what I wanted. Thank you, my dear." The guests murmured in delight, and Vanity blossomed with pride. I heard her whisper to a friend standing nearby, "Cost a fortune, but he deserves only the best." And then I realized it was my turn. All the other gifts had already been given. I slowly rose from the couch, clutching my modest package tightly. The living room suddenly seemed huge, and the road to Noel seemed endless. "Oh, Mom!" Noel noticed me as I approached. His voice didn't have the warmth of the other guests. "Did you bring a present too?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, and handed him the package. Noel took it with slight confusion, clearly surprised by the light weight. "What is this?" he asked, starting to unfold the paper. "Just something special," I mumbled. "I hope you like it." Noel ripped off the wrapping and stared at the tattered leather-bound book. His face, which had just brightened with pleasure, stretched. "A book?" he asked, as if I'd handed him a dead rat. "You gave me a book for 44 years? I tried to explain. "It's a first edition of Thomas the Brave Knight. You loved that story so much as a child, remember? We read it every night, and you always—" "A children's book?" Noel interrupted me. His voice was getting louder and his face was getting redder. "Really, Mom? Everyone gives normal adult gifts and you brought a shabby children's book?" There was an awkward silence in the room. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, surprised, embarrassed, pitying. "I thought it would be nice for you to remember." I started, but Noel wouldn't let me finish. "Remember what? How you saved money on everything, even normal gifts." He stood up abruptly, holding the book with 2 fingers as if it were contagious. 44 years, Mom. I'm a successful businessman. I have my own company, a house, a family. And you give me this crap." I took a step back, shocked by his reaction. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Vanity cover her mouth with her hand, but it was not shock in her eyes, but gloating satisfaction. "Noel, please," I whispered. "Just open the book." But he wasn't listening. His face was contorted with anger, the kind of pure, uncontrollable anger I'd seen in him as a child when he didn't get what he wanted. "You know what?" He lifted the book higher, showing it off to all the guests. "This is what I think of your gift." And with those words, he threw the book to the floor with force. The old binding clattered against the parquet, and the book opened, falling with the spine upwards. I stared in horror, unable to move or say anything. But Noel didn't stop there. He stepped closer to me, towering over my small figure, and said so loudly that even the waiters in the kitchen must have heard, "You are a disgrace to our family. Always have been and always will be." The living room fell into dead silence. I stood there, paralyzed with shock and humiliation, feeling hot tears come to my eyes. In that moment, I was grateful for my years as an accountant. They had taught me to keep my face even in the most stressful situations. "I apologize," I said quietly, addressing everyone and no one in particular. "I have to go." I turned and walked toward the exit, my back feeling the stares of everyone present. No one stopped me. No one said a word. It wasn't until I was at the door that I heard Winslow's quiet voice say, "Grandma, wait." But I couldn't stop. Not now. I walked out of the house without even turning around and quickly headed to my car. Only once I was inside did I let myself burst into tears, cradling my face in my hands. Through the tear-fogged windshield, I watched the party continue as the guests slowly made their way out to the backyard, where the next part of the festivities would begin. The book, my precious book with the check inside, was left lying on the living room floor, forgotten and abandoned by everyone. I started the car and slowly pulled into the driveway, feeling something inside me irrevocably broken. All my life I'd lived for my son, given him everything I could. And this is how he repaid me: public humiliation, cruel words, contempt. As I drove up to my house, I knew my plans had changed. I would not be going to Quiet Gardens. I would not quietly live out my life thinking about my ungrateful son. The $13 million that should have been his inheritance would now be my ticket to a new life. A life without Noel. And the book. Well, the book was left there, thrown on the floor, just like my motherly love, trampled and devalued. I spent a sleepless night tossing and turning in bed, replaying the events of my birthday. Noel's words echoed in my mind. "You are a disgrace to our family." How could he say that? Me, who devoted my whole life to him, denying myself everything so that he wouldn't need anything. I, who single-handedly raised him after Alan's death, working 2 jobs to pay for his education. Am I a disgrace? The morning brought clarity of thought, but it didn't ease the pain. I rose with the first rays of sunlight, feeling each of my years in aching joints. Breakfast didn't stick in my throat, so I limited myself to a cup of strong tea, sitting by the window and watching my quiet neighborhood wake up. My book, my check. Now they were lying somewhere in Noel's house, forgotten and unneeded. $13 million, a sum that could have changed his life, provided a trouble-free old age for me, given Winslow a great education. And he'd literally thrown it all on the floor, not even bothering to look inside. At 8 o'clock, I dialed the number of Simon Blackwell, my attorney who had helped me with investments and legal matters for the past 15 years. One of the few people who knew about my present financial situation. "Simon, I need to see you urgently," I said as soon as he answered. "It's regarding my will and a certain check." "Of course, Mrs. Abbott," he replied with his characteristic restraint. "I have a window at 10:30. Will that suit you?" "Absolutely. I'll be in your office." I began to pack methodically and carefully as I had done everything in my life. First, I pulled out all the documents relating to my assets, bank statements, investment portfolios, house deeds. Then I picked out a strict suit, gray with a faint lavender stripe. Alan always said that this suit made me look like a woman who was best not to be trifled with. Before I left, I stopped at the hallway mirror. Who was that woman looking back at me in the reflection? Wrinkles around her eyes and mouth, gray hair, a tired look. And yet there was a fire in those eyes now that hadn't been there yesterday. Determination. I will no longer be the victim of my own son's ingratitude. No more. Simon's office was in downtown Buchanan, a modern glass and concrete building in stark contrast to the Victorian architecture prevalent in the city. The receptionist, a young woman with a friendly smile, ushered me directly into the lawyer's office. Simon Blackwell was the epitome of what a successful lawyer should look like, an impeccably dressed man in his 50s, with a neatly trimmed beard and graying hair, and attentive brown eyes behind expensive, thin-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Abbott." He stood up to shake my hand. "It's good to see you, though I'm concerned about your urgent visit. Is everything all right?" I sank into the leather chair across from his desk and shook my head. No, Simon. I made a mistake and I want to fix it before it's too late. I spent the next hour telling him about my plan to give Noel all the money, about the book with the enclosed check, about the disastrous birthday party. Simon listened attentively, occasionally making notes in his notebook, but not interrupting. So, he summarized when I was done. You want to cancel the check and change your will, is that correct? Yes, I nodded. The check should be canceled immediately. As for the will, I have other plans for my money. May I ask what they are? I took a deep breath. I want to set up an Alan Abbott Charitable Foundation, a foundation that will support single parents, help them with their children's education, provide legal and financial support. Simon's eyes widened slightly in surprise. It's a very noble idea, Mrs. Abbott. But are you sure you want to hand over all your funds? 13 million is a considerable sum. Not all of it, I clarified. I want to leave 500,000 for Winslow, my granddaughter, for her education and her future. That money should be in a trust available only to her when she turns 25. And I want to leave enough for me to live comfortably myself. I've changed my mind about moving into a nursing home. Simon nodded and made a few more notes. We can arrange everything exactly as you want it. As for the check, I'll contact the bank immediately and initiate the withdrawal procedure. It will take some time, but given the amount and circumstances, they will take the request seriously. How quickly will it be ready? I asked. Revoking the check is a matter of days. As for setting up the fund and changing the will, it'll take longer, maybe a couple weeks to get everything set up properly. Okay, I nodded. The sooner the better. I want to put this matter to bed once and for all. When all the necessary papers were signed and instructions were given, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if the heavy weight I'd carried on my shoulders for years began to slip away. You know, Mrs. Abbott, Simon said as he walked me to the door, in the 15 years we've been working together, this is the first time I've seen you so determined. I smiled weakly. Sometimes, Simon, we need a good punch to wake up and see the truth. When I got home, I found Winslow on the porch. She was sitting on the steps with her arms wrapped around her knees like a little girl, not a 19-year-old college student. When she saw me, she jumped up. Grandma, I've been calling you all morning. I just realized I left my phone at home. I'm sorry, dear. I had an important meeting. We entered the house, and I went straight into the kitchen to put the kettle on. Winslow followed me like a shadow. Grandmother, I feel so awful about yesterday, she began, sitting down at the kitchen table. The way Daddy treated you, it's unforgivable. I pulled out the cups white with small blue floral designs, a wedding present from Alan's parents. One of the few things I still have from that time. Not your fault, Winslow. Your father. He always had a difficult temper. But to humiliate you in front of all the guests because of a gift? There was genuine outrage in my granddaughter's voice. I almost fell to the ground in shame. And Mom, she didn't even try to stop him, just stood there smirking. I put a cup of tea in front of her and sat down across from her. What happened after I left? Winslow cupped her hands around the cup as if trying to keep warm, even though it was a hot day. First, there was an awkward pause. Then Dad said something like, I apologize for the incident, and motioned for everyone to go out into the courtyard, where the tables had already been set. The party continued as if nothing had happened. And the book? I asked, trying to keep my voice as neutral as possible. Oh. Winslow looked a little embarrassed. When everyone was out, I picked it up off the floor. I wanted to give it back to you, but you'd already left. It's at our house now, along with the other gifts. Where exactly? I couldn't help my curiosity. In the garage, my granddaughter sighed. Daddy said to put all the presents there to sort them out later. But to be honest, he almost never takes the presents apart. Usually, Mom just gives them to charity or sells them online after a few weeks. I felt something inside me clench. Imagine. My precious gift, my favorite book with a check for 13 million, lying in a pile of junk in the garage. Good thing I decided to cancel the check. Winslow, I covered her hand with mine. I want you to know that whatever happened between me and your father has no bearing on my feelings for you. You are my treasure, and I will always love you. The girl's eyes filled with tears. You know, she said quietly, sometimes I don't understand how I could have been born into such a family. Dad's obsessed with money and status, mom's obsessed with brands and looks. And me? I just want to read books and maybe someday write my own. I smiled, feeling a rush of tenderness for this young creature who, by some miracle, retained purity of soul despite her surroundings. You'll do fine, dear. I'm sure of it. We talked for another hour or so, about her studies, about the books she had been reading lately, about her dreams. Not once did we mention Noel or vanity or yesterday's incident. It was as if they had tacitly agreed not to cloud our conversation with these topics. As Winslow was about to leave, I suddenly realized there was something I had to tell her. Winslow, I want you to know one more thing, I began as I helped her into her light jacket. I've changed my will. Most of my money will go to a charity, but I've set up a trust for you. When you turn 25, you'll have access to it. It'll be enough for your education and to start your own life without depending on your parents. Her eyes widened in surprise. Grandma, what are you talking about? What money? I thought you were only living on your pension. I smiled. Let's just say your old grandmother turned out to be a pretty good investor. You'll find out the details later. Just know that I've taken care of your future. Winslow hugged me so tightly that for a moment I had trouble breathing. You're the best, Grandma. The best in the world. After my granddaughter left, I sat in the silence of the living room for a long time, pondering the vicissitudes of fate. My son, for whom I lived and worked, turned out to be an ungrateful, selfish man. And his daughter, to whom I could not devote as much time as I would have liked, grew up to be a sensitive and understanding person. Life is full of irony. In the evening, I received a letter from Simon. He had already started the procedure of withdrawing the check and sent the necessary documents to the bank. In a few days, he wrote, everything would be official and the check would be void. I looked at the computer screen, reading and rereading the letter, and felt strangely calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't acting in Noel's interests, but in my own, and the feeling was liberating. The next day, I met with Simon again to discuss the details of setting up a charitable foundation. We decided to call it the Allen Abbott Family Support Fund, in honor of my late husband, who always believed in helping those in need. It will be a great way to honor his memory, Simon said as he looked over the preliminary documents, and to help people who were in a situation similar to yours after his death. I nodded, remembering Allen, his kindness, his laugh, his faith in people. He'd always said that true wealth wasn't measured in money, but in good deeds. I wonder what he would say about our son now. By the end of the week, all the paperwork for the check bounce was completed and sent. Simon assured me that the procedure was on track and the check would soon be officially canceled. The documents for the foundation were almost ready too. Only a few formalities remained. I began to plan my new life. Instead of moving to quiet gardens, I decided to travel, to visit the places I had always dreamed of: Paris, Rome, Barcelona, Tokyo. The list grew by the day, as did my excitement for the adventure ahead. On Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after my unfortunate birthday, I received an official notice from the bank. A check for $13 million, written in the name of Noel Abbott, was canceled and could no longer be cashed. The same day, a letter from Simon arrived. All the paperwork for the charitable foundation was ready and waiting for my signature. I stood at the window, both notices in my hands, and looked out at my garden, where the roses were blooming brightly on this sunny day. A strange feeling took over me. A mixture of sadness and relief, regret and hope. I thought about how things might have turned out differently if Noel had just opened the book, if he had valued more than material things, if he had remained the boy who had once listened with rapt attention to stories about the brave Knight Thomas. But there was no changing the past. You can only move forward. And that's what I was going to do. No regrets, no looking back. There was a new chapter of life ahead of me, a chapter I would write on my own, without regard for my ungrateful son. 3 weeks flew by. I was fully immersed in planning my future, booking plane tickets to Paris, studying guidebooks on European cities, looking for cozy hotels overlooking famous landmarks. Each day brought new ideas and opportunities. For the first time in many years, I felt truly free. The documents for the creation of a charitable foundation were signed and sent to the appropriate authorities. Simon assured me that within a month the foundation would be officially registered and we could start its work. I had already drawn up a list of activities and programs I wanted to implement: scholarships for children from single-parent families, legal support for single mothers, professional retraining programs, all the things I had missed when I was alone with little Noel in my arms after Alan's death. I tried not to think about my son, but sometimes memories broke through the wall I'd built, especially in the evenings when I sat in my chair by the fireplace with a cup of herbal tea. At those moments, my mind would wander back to that birthday, to the book I'd thrown on the floor, to the cruel words that still lingered in my heart. Noel hadn't tried to contact me since that night. Not a call, not a text, not even a formal apology through Winslow. It was as if I didn't exist in his life. My granddaughter visited me regularly, but she studiously avoided talking about her father, and I didn't insist. We both realized that some wounds were better left undisturbed. That morning, exactly 23 days after his unfortunate birthday, I was sitting on the veranda with the morning paper when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and I almost decided not to answer, but at the last moment I did. "Mrs. Abbott?" It was a man's voice. "This is Derek Harrington from the Buchanan Daily. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your son's car wash chain." I froze, clutching the phone a little harder than necessary. "I'm sorry, but I don't know what you mean. I have nothing to do with my son's business." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry if I'm bothering you. It's just that rumor has it that the premium Clin chain is in serious financial trouble. Some outlets have already closed. We're doing a story and we thought you might—" "I can't help you," I interrupted him, feeling my pulse quicken. "Have a good day." I hung up the phone and just sat there for a while, staring off into space. Noel's business was in danger? How could this be? Not so long ago, he was bragging that his chain of car washes was the most successful in the county, that revenues were growing every month, that he was planning to open new outlets in neighboring towns. My thoughts were interrupted by a call from Rose. "Irma, did you hear the news?" She started without preamble. "About Noel?" I already knew what it was about. "Yes, they say his business is on the verge of bankruptcy. I drove by his main car wash on Oak Street this morning, and there's a sign that says closed for renovation, but everyone knows that's just an excuse." I sighed. In a small town like Buchanan, rumors spread at the speed of wildfire. "I just got a call from a reporter from the local paper," I admitted. "But I don't know anything. Noel hasn't spoken to me since the incident." "Oh, Irma." I could hear the sympathy in Rose's voice. "I know you don't want to worry about him after everything that's happened, but still, he's your son." I didn't say anything. Of course, for all the pain Noel had caused me, I couldn't quite drown out my maternal feelings. Somewhere deep inside me, I still had hope that he'd come to his senses, that we could rebuild our relationship. But I also knew I'd made the right choice in canceling the check. Noel had to learn to live with his decisions and their consequences. That evening, I received an unexpected text from Winslow. "Grandma, can I stay with you for a couple days? It's difficult at home right now. Difficult." I immediately texted her that I would be happy to see her anytime. 2 hours later, she was at my doorstep, with a backpack full of books and eyes reddened with tears. "What's wrong, dear?" I asked, hugging her. Winslow shook her head, clearly not wanting to talk right now. I didn't insist. I made her a hot chocolate, her favorite drink since childhood, and it wasn't until we were snuggled in the living room that she finally spoke. "Daddy has some serious business problems," she said quietly, looking into her cup. "Some kind of loan he can't pay off. The bank is threatening to repossess the house and the cars. He and Mom fight all the time. She blames him for everything, screams that he's ruined their lives." I listened, feeling my heart clench. Not because of Noel, he was an adult, and he was responsible for his own financial decisions. Because of Winslow, who was caught up in this adult drama. "You can stay here as long as you need to," I said when she was done. "Your room is always ready for you." Winslow smiled weakly and kissed my cheek. She really did look exhausted, pale with dark circles under her eyes. No wonder she wanted to escape from a house filled with arguments and tension. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of an incoming message. It was Winslow again, though she was asleep in the next room. Grandma, I'm sorry, but Dad just called. He found out you had me and he's on his way here now. Says he found something important and wants to talk to you. I told him it was a bad idea, but he wouldn't listen. I barely had time to get dressed when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I looked out the window and saw Noel's black Mercedes pulling up in front of my house. My son jumped out of the car, slamming the door so hard it looked like the windows were about to shatter. He was holding something in his hand, and I was surprised to recognize it as an old leather-bound book, Thomas the Brave Knight. Noel literally flew up the steps and started drumming on the door, not giving himself the trouble to ring the bell. I approached the door slowly, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. "Mom!" he exclaimed as soon as I opened the door. "We need to talk." He looked awful, wrinkled, unshaven, with a feverish glint in his eyes. There was no trace of his usual grooming and self-assurance. "Come in," I said calmly, stepping aside. Noel burst into the hallway, waving a book. "Do you know what was inside?" he exclaimed, wasting no time in greeting me. "Do you know what you put in that damn book?" "Of course I do," I replied, keeping an icy calm. "I put a check for $13 million in there. My birthday present to you." Noel's face contorted with a mixture of shock, anger, and despair. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you just tell me what was inside? And you gave me the opportunity?" I parried. "You didn't even bother to open the book. Instead, you threw it on the floor and called me a disgrace to the family, in front of all the guests." Noel ran his hand over his face as if trying to erase the memories of that night. I didn't mean to," he stammered, clearly unable to find the words to justify it. "It doesn't matter. What matters now is this check. I found it last night when I was going through some stuff in the garage. Thought I'd sell some gifts to... whatever. I saw the book, so I thought I'd see what you got me that was so special. And I found a check." "Yeah," I nodded. "I found it. 3 weeks after my birthday. When I decided to sell the gifts to solve my financial problems." Noel didn't seem to hear my sarcasm. "I called the bank right away, but they said the check bounced." He was almost shouting. "What does that mean? Why did you cancel it?" At that moment, Winslow appeared on the stairs, attracted by the loud voices. She looked frightened, shifting her gaze from her father to me, and back again. "I canceled it because you showed you didn't appreciate me or my gifts," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. $13 million is all I've accumulated in my life. I wanted to give it to you because you were my son, and I thought you deserved that inheritance. But your behavior has proven otherwise." "Mom, please." Noel suddenly changed tactics, his voice becoming pleading. "You don't understand. I'm in a desperate situation. Creditors are on my heels. The bank is threatening to take the house. This money would have saved us." "I understand perfectly well," I replied, "but the decision has already been made. The money has been transferred to a charitable foundation named after your father. It will help single parents and their children, like you and I were after Alan's death." Noel turned pale as if I'd slapped him. "You gave $13 million to charity?" he asked incredulously. "My money? Not yours," I corrected him. "It was mine. I earned it, I invested it, I multiplied it, and I've decided what to do with it." Noel sank into the chair in the hallway, still clutching the book in his hands. He looked utterly crushed. "You can't do this," he muttered. It's not fair." "Unfair?" I felt the anger I'd been holding back all these years rising in me. "It wasn't fair to raise you alone, working 2 jobs so you could go to private school. It wasn't fair to deny yourself everything so you could have the best toys, the best clothes, the best opportunities. It wasn't fair to put my whole soul into you and get nothing but arrogance and neglect in return." I stopped, realizing I was almost screaming. I took a deep breath and continued in a calmer voice. "But you know what's really unfair? That you grew up thinking that the world owed you everything without giving you anything in return. That you can humiliate your own mother and expect her to just smile and give you everything she has. That's what's truly unfair, Noel." My son remained silent with his head down. Winslow quietly walked over and stood beside me, placing her hand on my shoulder in silent support. "What am I supposed to do now?" Noel finally asked. and there was genuine despair in his voice. I'm going to lose everything, the business, the house, the cars. You'll have to deal with it on your own, I said firmly, like I'd done after your father died. No 13 million, no support, no hope of miraculous salvation, just my own strength and my own mind. Noel looked up at me, his eyes a mixture of hurt and anger. Vanity was right, he said bitterly. You've always been a vindictive old woman. You're punishing me for one mistake, one bad day. No, Noel, I shook my head. I'm not punishing you. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own actions. It's called growing up, and it seems to be 30 years too late for you. Noel stood up, clenching his fists. You're going to regret this, he gritted through his teeth. When Vanity and Winslow and I are on the street, when we have nothing to eat, you'll regret it. Papa! Winslow exclaimed indignantly. How can you say that? But Noel was no longer listening. He threw the book on the floor, just as he had the day he was born, and stormed out of the house, slamming the door loudly. Winslow and I stood in silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Finally, my granddaughter bent down and picked up the book. Did you really put a check for 13 million in there? She asked quietly, gently smoothing the wrinkled pages. Yes, I nodded. Everything I had. I wanted to secure your family's future. Winslow shook her head, clearly trying to make sense of what she was hearing. And Dad didn't even open it. He didn't, I confirmed. He wasn't interested. It was just a book. We went into the kitchen where I started making breakfast, and Winslow sat at the table, still holding the book. What's going to happen now? She asked. With Dad, with their house, with the business? I sighed, pulling eggs and milk out of the refrigerator. I don't know, honey. Your father is a grown man. He's going to have to deal with his own problems. And Mom's certainly not going to help, Winslow grinned bitterly. Yesterday she was yelling that she'd file for divorce if he didn't find the money by the end of the month. That she didn't sign up for the life of a bankrupt. I shook my head. Typical Vanity. When things are going well, she's there for him, but when problems arise, she's the first to jump ship. You know what's ironic? Winslow continued, leafing through the book. Dad got into financial trouble because he took out a huge loan to expand his business. He wanted to open 5 more car washes in neighboring towns. But he miscalculated the costs, and now he couldn't make the interest payments. She stopped at a page with an illustration of the brave knight Thomas fighting a dragon. That book, had it really been his favorite as a child? I smiled, remembering little Noel sitting on my lap, listening with rapt attention to the story of a knight who won not by force, but by wit and kindness. Yes, he knew it by heart. Especially loved the moment when Thomas realizes that the dragon is not evil, but just scared and alone. And instead of fighting him, offers him friendship. Winslow looked thoughtfully at the illustration. Too bad he'd forgotten that lesson. I nodded silently, stirring the batter for the pancakes. A shame indeed. Noel had forgotten not only the lessons of the children's book, but more important things: respect, gratitude, modesty. And here was the result. On the verge of bankruptcy, with a wife ready to leave him at the first sign of trouble, with a broken relationship with his mother. That same evening, I got a call from Rose. You won't believe what's happening, she exclaimed instead of greeting me. The whole town is talking about it. Vanity had put all her designer clothes, bags, shoes, jewelry, up for sale, right on the front lawn of their house like a garage sale, only with price tags of thousands of dollars. And Noel. They say he was seen at the bank yelling at the manager so loudly that security took him outside. I listened to the news with a heavy heart. Despite everything that had happened between us, Noel was still my son, and seeing him collapse was painful. But I also knew I couldn't, and shouldn't, save him this time. Sometimes the hardest lesson is to realize that no one will come to the rescue, that you have to rely only on yourself. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, thinking about Noel, about the book, about the 13 million that could have changed his life if only he'd shown a little respect and curiosity. Thinking about how one decision, one moment of arrogance could change an entire destiny. And how sometimes the most valuable lessons we learn come at the cost of the greatest losses. Paris greeted me with fine rain and the smell of fresh pastries. I stood at the window of my room in a small hotel near Montmartre and couldn't believe I was finally here, in the city I had dreamed of all my life. In my 68 years, I had crossed the ocean for the first time. It was the first time I was so far away from Buchanan, from my routine, from the past that had weighed me down for years. It had been 2 months since the day Noel had discovered the check in the book. 2 months in which my life had changed beyond recognition. I'd sold the house in Buchanan, the same house where I'd lived for almost 40 years, where I'd raised my son, where I'd kept the memories of my husband. I sold it quickly, even a little below market value, because I wanted to close this chapter of my life as soon as possible. I gave away most of my belongings. The furniture went to a local center for low-income families, books to a library, clothes to a charity store. I kept only the essentials, what could fit into 2 suitcases. It is amazing how little a person really needs, especially when he decides to start from scratch. The Allen Abbott Charitable Trust was officially registered at the end of the month. Simon and I hired an executive director, an energetic middle-aged woman named Abigail Thompson, who had once been a single mother herself and had first-hand knowledge of the difficulties faced by single-parent families. She enthusiastically set about developing programs to help, and within weeks the fund was up and running. I kept $2 million, more than enough for the comfortable life and travel I had always dreamed of. The rest, minus the amount set aside for Winslow, went to the foundation's accounts. The decision brought me a strange relief, as if I had lifted from my shoulders a heavy burden I had been carrying for too long. On the day of my departure from Buchanan, only Rose saw me off at the train station. We hugged as tightly as only true friends who had spent decades of their lives together could. "Promise to write," she said, wiping away my tears, "and call, and send postcards from every city." "I promise," I smiled, "and you promise to visit me when I get back from Europe and settle down on the coast." Rose nodded, not trusting her voice. We both knew that this farewell was not forever, but still the end of a certain phase of our lives. I hadn't heard from Noel since the day he'd broken into my house, demanding money. Winslow told me that he'd sold his business to a competitor for enough to pay off most of his debts, but not enough to maintain the same standard of living. Vanity, just as my granddaughter predicted, filed for divorce, taking everything she could with her. She and Noel sold the house in the North Hills and split the proceeds. His son moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of Buchanan and took a job as manager of a car dealership, a humiliating demotion for a man who once owned his own chain of car washes. Winslow was the only link I had to the past. We talked by video link almost every day. She talked about her studies, her new friends in college, the books she'd read. I helped her with her tuition, directly through the college administration, bypassing Noel. After her parents divorced, Winslow decided to stay on campus even on weekends, returning home only for the holidays. I couldn't blame her. The family atmosphere was toxic. And now I stood at the window of a Paris hotel, watching passers-by under umbrellas hurrying about their business, and felt freer than ever. The next 3 months were scheduled by days. After Paris, Rome was waiting for me, then Barcelona, Vienna, Prague, cities I had read about in books, seen in movies, but never hoped to visit in person. I left the hotel and opened my umbrella, a small folding one, bought especially for this trip. The rain was getting heavier, but it didn't bother me. I walked slowly through the narrow streets of Montmartre, looking at the store windows, the architecture of the buildings, the faces of passers-by. Every step, every breath, every glance filled me with new impressions, new emotions. I felt that I was not a 68-year-old widow from a provincial American town, but just a human being, alive, curious, open to the world. In a small cafe on the corner, I ordered a coffee and a croissant, the most ordinary breakfast for a Parisian, but for me it was a little adventure. An elderly waiter with a thick gray mustache smiled at me and said something in French. I didn't understand a word, but I smiled back. There was a kind of freedom in it, too, not to understand and not to be understood, just to exist in the moment, without the weight of the past and expectations of the future. The next weeks flew by like a day. I wandered through the Louvre museums, climbed the Eiffel Tower, sat in cafes on the Champs-Élysées, observing the life of a large European city. Every night I sent long messages to Winslow with photos and impressions, and to Rose I sent traditional paper postcards with views of the sights. From Paris, I traveled to Rome, an eternal city where every stone breathed history. Then there was Barcelona with its quirky Gaudi architecture, Vienna with its imperial grandeur, Prague with its Gothic spires. In each city, I left a piece of my heart and took with me new memories, new sensations, new understanding of the world. By the end of the third month of traveling, I felt a slight fatigue. After all, my age was making itself felt. I decided to pause and spend a week in a small seaside town in the south of France, just relaxing on the beach and putting my thoughts in order. It was there in a small hotel overlooking the Mediterranean Sea that the past caught up with me in the form of a message from Winslow. Grandma, Daddy found out where you are. I don't know how, but he says he's on his way to see you. I tried to talk him out of it, but he won't listen. I'm sorry. I reread the message several times, not believing my eyes. Noel was coming to see me? Across the ocean? To another country? Why? And most importantly, how did he know where I was? The answer came the next day, when I returned from the beach and found a familiar figure at the hotel front desk. Noel, in a rumpled suit with a travel bag at his feet, was arguing with the receptionist, clearly trying to get my room number. I could have stealthily walked out and avoided the encounter. I could have gone up to the room another way, but instead I approached him. Noel, my voice was calm, though my heart was beating faster than usual. What are you doing here? He turned so abruptly that he nearly knocked over a vase of flowers on the front desk. Mom, finally! I drove to 3 hotels before I found you. He looked worse than the last time I saw him, gaunt, with deep wrinkles around his eyes and a graying in his hair that hadn't been there before. Divorce and financial ruin hadn't been good for him. You didn't answer my question, I said. What are you doing here? Noel looked back at the receptionist, who was watching our meeting curiously. Can we talk somewhere private? I sighed and nodded toward the small lobby bar. 10 minutes, no more than that. We sat down at a table in the corner of the bar. Noel ordered a whiskey double shot despite the early hour. I limited myself to mineral water. So? I asked when the drinks arrived. Noel took a big sip of whiskey, as if gathering his courage. I came to apologize, he said finally. For everything. For the way I acted at the birthday party. For being ungrateful. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Noel was clearly nervous, twirling his glass. The last few months have been hell for me, he continued. Vanity left, taking almost everything I had left. The house had to be sold. The business, too. I'm a manager at Peterson's car dealership, the same Peterson I once called a loser. He grinned bitterly. Ironic, isn't it? Now I work for him, and he enjoys every second of my humiliation. I'm sorry you're having difficulties, I said in a neutral tone. But I still don't understand why you flew across the ocean to tell me this. Noel took another sip of whiskey. I came here to ask for your help, he finally admitted. I need money, Mom. Not all 13 million, of course, but at least some of it. Enough to start over. To open a new business, maybe in another city where they don't know me. I looked at my son, a grown man, father of a grown daughter, and saw a little boy asking for a new toy. Still the same selfishness, still the same expectation that his mother should solve all his problems. The money isn't mine anymore, Noel, I said calmly. It belongs to the charity. I can't legally take it even if I wanted to. But you kept something for yourself, didn't you? There was a pleading note in his voice. You travel around Europe, you stay in nice hotels. So you have money. I'm not asking for that much, just a couple 100,000. I shook my head. Even if I had extra money, I wouldn't give it to you, Noel. Not because I don't love you, it's because it wouldn't help. You'll spend it again trying to impress people, trying to regain the status you think you're entitled to, and you'll find yourself in the same situation again. Noel's face contorted with anger. You're just getting back at me. For one mistake, for one bad day? No, I said firmly. I'm not taking revenge. I'm trying to finally be a real mother, the kind who doesn't indulge her child's whims but teaches him to stand on his own 2 feet. The one who loves him enough to let him face the consequences of his actions. Noel stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. Enough of this moralizing, he exclaimed, drawing the attention of the other bar patrons. You've never been a real mother. A real mother wouldn't let her son lose everything. I stood up too, keeping my composure. A real mother doesn't let her son grow up to be a spoiled egoist who thinks the world owes him something. I made that mistake once, Noel. I won't make it again. I took my purse out of my purse and put the money for the drinks on the table. You know, I said, looking him in the eye, the real inheritance I wanted to leave you was in that book. Not in the check, but in the story itself. The values I tried to instill in you, kindness, respect, gratitude, but you didn't even bother to open it. With those words, I headed for the exit of the bar. Noel followed me, ignoring the indignant glances of the other customers. You can't just leave, he shouted at my back. I am your son, your flesh and blood. I turned around at the door. Yes, you are my son, and I will always love you, because you are my flesh and blood. But that doesn't mean I have to support your lifestyle or save you from the consequences of your decisions. A grown man, Noel, should be in charge of his own life. You just don't care about me. His voice was a mixture of anger and despair. You fly around the world, you spend money on yourself, and you can't help your own son. I've been helping you your whole life, I said quietly. It was time for me to help myself. I left the bar and headed for the elevators. Noel didn't follow me. Maybe he was stopped by the hotel staff. Maybe he finally realized the futility of his attempts. Either way, when the elevator doors closed behind me, I felt strangely relieved, as if the last thread tying me to the past had been severed. Back in the room, I immediately called Winslow on the video link. She answered instantly, a look of concern on her face. Grandma, did Daddy find you? He was in a terrible state when he left. Yes, he's here, I confirmed. We talked. Everything's all right. I told her briefly about our meeting, omitting the most unpleasant details. Winslow listened attentively, nodding occasionally. I thought he was going to ask for money. She sighed when I was done. He called me several times, asking if I could lend him something from the trust you set up for me. I told him I didn't have access to that money until I was 25, but he didn't believe me. Thought you were just turning me against him. I shook my head. Even now, after losing everything, Noel couldn't accept responsibility for what had happened. It's always easier to blame others, me, Vanity, the economic crisis, bad luck. What are you going to do now? Winslow asked. Will you stay in France? No, I smiled. I plan to return to the States in a couple weeks, but not to Buchanan. I've got my eye on a little house on the Oregon coast, a quiet place overlooking the ocean. I think it's the perfect place to start a new chapter of my life. That sounds wonderful, Winslow smiled back. I'll definitely come visit you on vacation. I'll be waiting, I nodded. Your room will be ready. After talking to my granddaughter, I went out to the balcony of the room. The sun was setting over the horizon, coloring the sea in shades of pink and gold. A light breeze brought the scent of salt and lavender. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with that clean, fresh air. In that moment, I realized that I felt no regret, no bitterness, not even anger. Only the quiet certainty that I had done the right thing. Noel was a grown man, and it was time he learned to live without my constant support. Maybe, after losing everything, he would finally find what really mattered. Not money, not status, not outward glitz, but the real values I'd tried to instill in him. And me. I was finally free. Free of guilt, free of responsibility for other people's mistakes, free of the toxic relationships that had poisoned my life for years. There was a new house by the ocean, new travels, new books, new experiences ahead, and a granddaughter who had inherited not only my eyes, but my soul. That night, I slept soundly as I hadn't slept in years. And in the morning, walking out into the hotel lobby, I learned from the receptionist that Mr. Abbott had checked out at dawn and left for the airport. He had left no message for me. I nodded and stepped outside, where the bright Mediterranean sun was flooding the narrow streets of the seaside town. A new day, new possibilities, a new life, without the burden of the past, without the shadow of an ungrateful son, without the regrets of what might have been. I closed the hotel door behind me and headed toward the waterfront, feeling lightness in every step. The book of my life had turned the page, and I was ready to write a new chapter one that I wanted to write.